Hello everyone, my name is Tom, and you're watching The Roundtable. Fiction has a wide array of different types of characters. You got protagonists, you got antagonists, you got dynamic characters, static characters, all different types of characters that you can use to tell a story. But something a lot of people don't really seem to understand is just because you don't like a character doesn't mean that they're a bad character or that they're poorly written. One example of this is Pearl from Steven Universe. Or at least in the first season, people didn't really like her, but she was still one of the best written characters in the show. This is a theme that I see quite often in discourse around stories, especially in cartoons. Something that I see that is very common among fans of media is that a lot of times we like to try and take the perspective of a writer, someone who knows what they're talking about when we want to talk about our favorite shows. And unfortunately, a lot of us just don't have the knowledge or experience in writing to actually take that perspective in a way that is constructive. In order to look at a story from a writer's perspective, you need to be able and willing to take one or two steps back and actually learn what you're talking about. Learn how these stories are made, and never stop learning. Just keep on taking in information, assume that you don't know anything. Always go in assuming that there's something that you have to learn, and that's how you eventually get to the point where you can talk about things from the perspective of someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Instead of just jumping in and using writing words that you hear people use and just kind of sort of know what they mean. Waluigi is a multi-dimensional antagonist protagonist whose motivations are clearly defined by his relationships. What did I just say? I don't think I said anything. I think I just used a bunch of writing words in a complete sentence to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. But the thing is there's actually nothing wrong with being a member of the audience when talking about TV shows. Really any media, any story, whether it be a play, a book, or whatever, there's nothing wrong with being a part of the audience because you're the one who the story is for. You're the reason that people write stories. But my point is being a member of the audience still means that you have a valid perspective when it comes to talking about these things. You just shouldn't try and talk like you're a writer. In fact, a lot of people who are writers or who do these things for a living, they don't take in these stories with the perspective of like trying to deconstruct it or understand the stories on a deeper level. You kind of have to turn off that side of your brain, because if you watch every TV show, read every book, and watch every movie trying to deconstruct it, then you're never going to get any joy out of what is supposed to be a recreational activity. Trust me. And if you want to be a writer, then it's important to understand what audiences are looking for, and the best way to do that is to be a member of the audience. And if you can understand what the audience is looking for, then that's going to make you a better writer, because writing, entertaining, all that stuff is meant to be a selfless activity. Meant to be, as long as people don't insert their egos into it, but that's a whole nother story. The true goal in telling a great story is to have an effect on your audience. Can you engage them? Can you get them to connect to your characters? Are you able to evoke a powerful emotional response out of them, whether it be negative or positive? What you're doing when you create a story is you're making a situation where people can practice empathy, where they can feel a simulation of a situation to take on a different perspective. When you master this, your stories can help people take on different points of view or just escape the realities of their lives and just take a break. Or they can get whatever other meaning you can attach to consuming media, because everyone's going to have their own unique experience with your story. That's part of the beauty of being able to write. This is why before jumping into the writer's chair, you kind of have to understand who you're doing it for and what you want them to feel. At the same time, when you're deconstructing media from a critical perspective, you have to understand what we, the audience, are meant to take away from it. Specifically in this video, I want to talk about the characters. Characters are an interesting concept because they aren't real. They're the product of someone's imagination, and what they become is up to the people who are portraying them, writing them, and how they're ultimately perceived in the eyes of an audience. At the end of the day, a character's traits, motives, and decisions are decided by whoever's writing them in different narratives, and that is ultimately what determines who the reality of that character is. But people love characters, people obsess over characters, which is why a lot of the discussion you'll find around analyzing stories is centered around the characters, because people can connect with them and people identify with them. And a lot of these discussions are centered around the character's development and how well or badly they are written. Today there are a few commonly controversial characters who I want to talk about who I feel get kind of a warped perception from their audiences. And the first character I want to talk about is Jackie from Star vs. the Forces of Evil. So Jackie, I have noticed, is a very unliked character in the Star vs. community. And the reason I've seen for this is not only because she threatens Starco. Oh, yeah, let me just put all this away for now. It's because she kind of fits the mold of what is typically called a Mary Sue. For those of you who are not informed on what that is, it's basically a character that has no objective flaws or weaknesses, or, is just overall overpowered, too perfect. And that's a problem in the eyes of many because it makes it difficult for an audience to connect with the character. Of course, a lot of claims I see of this are from before the end of Jacko, so if you're one of the people out there who is saying this and interpret me disagreeing and arguing against that idea as attacking you personally, just don't. Because honestly, a lot of these arguments had some ground to stand on and weren't as obviously wrong before Jackie kinda up and left. Meaning her first and maybe only run in the show wasn't complete yet. But now that it is, from what I can tell, she's not a badly written character at all because she served her purpose. A lot of times people who have some insight into how writing characters works fall into the trap of seeing characters as only good if they are written how one thinks characters ought to be written. Kinda similar to how pro wrestling fans only think a wrestling match is good if it's what they think a good match ought to be, or how some people might listen to music and start to form a subjective idea of what a good song ought to be. My point is, when we consume any type of art and start forming our interpretations, we also form an idea of what good is, and sometimes we have trouble opening our eyes to whatever doesn't fall into that category. I think people really fall into this trap with Jackie because she represents a character that is important to the story, but she doesn't resonate all that much with audiences, and by extension, she doesn't fit the typical idea of what is a good character, because she doesn't really need to. A big reason people hate Jackie, plain and simple, is because she has her shit together. And let's be honest, the vast majority of those of us in the audience or just in the world do not. So when we see a character who has her shit together, is too blessed to be stressed, naturally we're gonna respond with, okay. Seems fake, but okay. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but some people got lives that ain't a mess. Crazy, I know, but they do exist. Doesn't mean they don't have problems or that they're content with how things are, but some people don't have a lot of issues and just enjoy life. But at the same time, to be quite honest, if you think Jackie is perfect, you just aren't paying attention. She handles every situation amazingly well, but she ain't cruising through life with no problems. She's kinda awkward too. I mean, she's just lucky enough for it to come across as more charming than uncomfortable. But most of all, look at her relationship with Marco. The poor girl had a dude who's all over her, crushing the hardest on her, ready to hand her the world. Then he goes and falls for another girl, and she knows. She knows, and she knows quick. This boy's into Star, and even after everything he said about being into her, she just doesn't compare to this other girl in the eyes of her boyfriend. She handled it well. She was hella mature about it, and dealt with it in a way that would hurt the least for everyone involved, but that is still one of the worst possible outcomes of a relationship that you never want to happen, and that's what she had to deal with. That is not a perfect life. Watching her only one fall for someone else. No matter how much she understood the situation and handled it with grace, that had to sting. That takes a hit to your self-esteem, no matter who you are. Also, seeing where Jacko went goes to show that Jackie was never meant to be that fleshed out to begin with. And that's another area where the conception of what ought to be overshadows what's needed. What Jackie provided for the series, in a way, is actually what Starco shippers desperately needed to happen. There were no feelings between Star and Marco until Jackie became attainable to Marco. Until Star saw Marco as someone's boyfriend and saw him put his primary attention into someone other than her. She didn't realize how she felt about Marco. That ultimately was Jackie's purpose in the narrative, to get the ball rolling between Star and Marco.
Don't you think it's weird that Marco asked me to the dance and then totally changed his mind at the last minute? That's not cool, right? What?
The reason she was in the show so much beyond that is because, well, they needed to realistically build up to her relationship with Marco. She needed to be established in concept to fill the role of that unattainable love interest. Then she had to live up to it enough to make it believable that Marco wouldn't just be like, oh, never mind, I'm disappointed, I like Star instead. Because that trope has been done and would really just make Marco look indecisive. Even now, who's to say Marco won't go with Star and be like, oh man, I was hyping this up way more in my head, and I'm not actually that into you. But that would be more expected if Jackie turned out to be unable to meet Marco's expectations. Because then Marco just turns into a guy who has unrealistic expectations, and no girl he ever crushes on will ever meet them. The way they did it actually puts over Marco's feelings for Star, because he genuinely wanted things to work with Jackie. But his Star feelings made it impossible. Does this mean you need to like Jackie? No, you don't need to like her, and that's part of her role. The story doesn't suffer, and it may actually benefit from audience members not liking Jackie. Because one of the main goals of the show, alongside the story going down in Muni with Eclipsa and Globgor and everything else, is Star and Marco getting together. So Jackie's purpose at the end of her role in the story is to get people wanting Starco, and she does that. So you don't have to like Jackie, but you definitely should not be hating on the writers or the show or getting carried away with not liking her. Next thing I want to go into is when members of an audience might identify with a character to the point where they get a false sense of ownership over a character. They might start warping the perception of the canon and start getting hostile with people over negative discourse about the character. The main pillar of this topic that sticks out to me is Lapis Lazuli from Steven Universe. Before I go into this topic, let me first preface this by saying that if you can find a headcanon in a character that helps you cope with the issues in your life and helps you feel less alone, then go ahead. Find comfort in that, but it goes without saying, of course, that identifying with a character is not an excuse to harass those who don't like the character, or take it personally when someone gives negative feedback on the character. I'm actually saying this knowing that there is a possibility that giving my honest opinion of Lapis Lazuli and the relationship she has with the Steven Universe fandom may result in me getting backlash, but I'm not gonna let the fear of that keep me from being honest about this character, so let's rip this band-aid off and talk about it. Lapis as a character is meant to be very vulnerable. She has a lot of trauma she's working through. She's definitely dealing with some level of post-traumatic stress, and as someone who's been diagnosed in the past with the same disorder, I do notice behaviors in her that I've experienced myself. A lot of people who have dealt with mental health issues in their lives strongly identify with Lapis, while on the other hand, there are people that are convinced that Lapis is an abusive character based on the portrayal of her relationship with Peridot in Raising the Barn. And I mean, there's the Jasper thing, but this is more of a cultural problem than a problem of interpreting media, but to say Lapis is abusive based on this episode, there are a number of blanks you have to fill in. As for Lapis's relationship with Jasper, Rebecca Sugar herself has said that Lapis was using Malachite to take her trauma and aggression towards the crystal gems out on Jasper. And even with depression, PTSD, or any other emotional or mental issues, that's an extremely unhealthy way to deal with your issues, and it's just not okay. You can't take out your issues on other people. That's just a rule of life. But in the case of Peridot, what I saw more than anything was poor communication skills on the part of Lapis mostly, but it's also important to note that Peridot's failure to communicate, which is definitely present, came from her empathy for what Lapis had gone through and her desire to put Lapis before herself. The narrative being that sometimes things aren't easy. You have conflicting feelings, you have conflicting motives, you want to care for someone, and sometimes it's hard to tell if telling them the truth or going along with whatever they do is the best course of action, and ultimately saying that even if there's going to be conflict, being honest is what's most important. But that's a bit of a tangent. This doesn't reflect on Lapis because even though it's coming from a good place, it's still a failure to communicate on Peridot's end. Especially when during the first interaction about leaving Earth, when Peridot wasn't trying to say how badly she wanted to stay on Earth and she was just giving reasons for why they couldn't go, Lapis was actually willing to accommodate the issues Peridot had. And what I saw in this situation was conflict, which happens in all relationships. No relationship is perfect or completely healthy, and there are going to be points where the interests of different parties conflict. And just because one person is more willing to compromise themselves for the sake of their friend or partner doesn't mean they're being abused, especially when they fail to express their sacrifices by trying to convince themselves and everyone involved that it's what they actually want.
Whoa, Peridot, it sounds like you don't really want to go.
Is it healthy? No, but it's not abuse. It's actually shown that Peridot has failed to communicate with Lapis for a while once she actually does start voicing her own thoughts and feelings.
Why didn't you tell me sooner?
Well, there are many things I should say, but they would upset you, so in general, I don't say those things.
Peridot, that's lying!
Lapis is of course upset with Peridot, but not because of the difference of perspective, it's because she's just now hearing how Peridot really feels. But regardless of what Peridot felt, Lapis's main priority was to stay safe from Homeworld, and I don't think anyone faults her for leaving on her own. So that discussion actually does give us an idea of what the canon representation of Lapis Lazuli is supposed to be, and a few of the emotionally charged positions on her. Let's talk about how things get skewed. As I mentioned, people identify with Lapis on an emotional level. What happens as a result is people often start projecting themselves onto the character to the point where any judgment on the character is a personal attack on them, creating a hostile environment for anyone trying to have an honest conversation about the character, because Lapis is honestly really underutilized and her writing isn't always that great. She kind of feels like she's just in the show still because of popularity. Her first arc was great, it was powerful, impactful, she developed, her soundtrack was sick.
Did you even wonder who I used to be? Steven, run!
Then she just kind of came back for Jailbreak, seemingly just to be around to come back later and not do anything. Yeah, just go off in the ocean so we can just kind of bring you back later and put you in a barn, and then not really do anything with you. But you'll be there. Personally, I'm kind of convinced that after Ocean Gem, there wasn't really a plan for Lapis, and everything since then has been made up as they go along, because, to be quite honest, that's kind of how it feels. Another important detail is that Lapis is a flawed character, and she has done some bad things. That's just a fact. She literally trapped Jasper in the ocean to cruelly take out her problems on. And that's not just speculation. Rebecca Sugar has confirmed this on the Steven Universe podcast as her intention. But even with all this information, there's nothing wrong about liking or not liking Lapis. There's nothing wrong with having an opinion on a character. As important as stories can be to forming perspectives, teaching morals, and all these other things, at the end of the day, they don't really change anything. It's about what you personally take away from a story that inspires a change in the way that you live your life that really matters. And if someone can see something positive in a character and they like that character for that reason, they're not harming anyone for feeling that way. Because everyone's different. Everyone's going to see good things and bad things in different people. So what do I want you to take away from this video? I don't really know. Honestly, I'm very tired right now, and I think that everyone should just be nicer to each other and just let people live. So go and be nice to someone. Anyways, that's been the Runaway Club, and also Patreon, Teespring, like, bell, subscribe, everything, share. I don't know, bro. Thank you for watching the Runaway Club on the Roundtable, but Tom isn't just on the Roundtable. I have my own self-titled personal channel. I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, I have a Snapchat, I have all that good stuff. In fact, I even have a Tumblr. So if you're interested in any of that, check that out, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.